بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. أما بعد, we begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and send blessings and salutations upon our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his entire household, his loyal companions, and those who followed him and helped him in his way. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless every single one of us and to grant us goodness fi dunya wal akhirah. Ameen ya rabbil alameen. Let us open this gathering by reciting Surah Al-Fatiha as a gift to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as with the intention that tonight's event will go smoothly and that this gathering of a community who is in remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be blessed by him, inshaAllah. إلى حضرة النبي المصطفى سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. الفاتحة. Alhamdulillah. Dear speakers, fellow schoolmates, and guests of this blessed gathering, allow me to begin with the most humble greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Welcome to G2G's first session of this semester. Of this semester. And just to introduce myself, my name is Muhammad Shazwan, and I will be taking you through this evening's event, inshallah. For those joining us for the first time, allow me to share a little bit about what G2G is all about. Guide to Goodness, or G2G, is a ground-up initiative under the NUS Muslim Society that provides regular classes which focuses on the sciences of Islamic spirituality and Islamic sacred knowledge. G2G also envisions itself to be a guide to goodness to all and aims to uplift our community with Islamic spirituality. It's been a while since G2G first started, and Alhamdulillah, G2G returns again in its fourth year with a new 3-part series entitled Uncovering Our Treasures. For this iteration, we tend to learn more about maximizing our potential as Muslim youths through our intellectual, social, and spiritual capacities. And to do this, we will draw upon the experiences, practices, and history of some iconic aspects of Islam, inshallah. And this series also hopes to build upon our events in the previous semester, where we explored some of the key concepts in Tasawwuf by adding a more practical dimension to our understanding of spirituality. Alhamdulillah, for this evening, we are honored with the presence of our distinguished speakers, Al-Fadil Dr. Muhammad Mubarak, Al-Fadil Mr. Ibrahim Tahir. Ahlan wa sahlan, welcome to NUS and to G2G's event. Brothers and sisters, do allow me to briefly introduce our speakers here. I believe that they are definitely not strangers to us, given their immense contributions to our community here, alhamdulillah. Ustaz Dr. Muhammad Mubarak received his PhD in Islamic Civilization and Contemporary Issues at University Brunei Darussalam, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin Center of Islamic Studies. His book, Equipping the People with Knowledge, which is sold at Wardah Books, by the way, traces the ways Ustaz Syed Ahmad Smaid led Muslims of the Nusantara, or the Malay archipelago, towards intellectual and spiritual revival through flourishing Islamic literacy. Dr. Mubarak is also a lecturer at Jamia Education Center and teaches voluntarily at the Muslim Converts Association of Singapore. Ustaz Dr. Mubarak is also a member of the Religious Rehabilitation Group, RRG Secretariat. And our next speaker, Mr. Ibrahim Tahir, as most of us would know, is the founder of Wardah Books, our favorite bookstore in Singapore, alhamdulillah. He did so with the vision of creating a bookstore that replicates one's living room. This certainly rests in the hearts of many, as Wardah Books is recognized as a popular site for readers of all ages today. Mr. Ibrahim joined the book industry by becoming a book editor working with Education Publishing Bureau, EPB, and Singapore National Publishing, SNP, working mainly on textbooks, assessment books, and workbooks for levels ranging from nursery to secondary school. He spent some 4 years in educational publishing before moving on to general publishing with edition Didier Millet, thank you, EDM, where he was roped in to work on massive reference books such as Singapore, the Encyclopedia, and Singapore Biodiversity, an Encyclopedia of the Natural Environment and Sustainable Development. Mr. Ibrahim also researched and edited Hand to Heart, a 248-page book chronicling the contributions of Malay Muslim organizations and pioneers in the Malay Muslim community, such as Yunus Abdullah, Singapore's first Malay legislative councillor. And in Mr. Ibrahim's words, reading is a civilizational activity. Seeking truth and a love for knowledge brings people out of a less refined stage into one of civility. Okay, my script is quite long. Please bear with me. The title for tonight's event is The Reader, an Agent of Change. Brothers and sisters, Islam has always encouraged reading as part and parcel of enhancing our intellectual capabilities and spiritual well-being. In this session, we hope to reinstall the meaning of reading effectively to seek self-transformation, and in doing so, be agents of positivity and service to the society and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I hope everyone is as excited as I am to embark on this evening's forum discussion as we gather insights and a better understanding of how we can realign our intentions when reading purposefully, inshallah. Before we begin with tonight's forum, may we ask for the permission of our speakers to have a short recitation of the Quran? Thank you, Ustaz and Mr. Ibrahim. We will be reciting.
Our permission.
Now, we will be reciting verses 1 to 5 from Surah Al-Alaq, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم صدق الله العظيم. الفاتحة. Alhamdulillah, we will now begin our event proper after much talking by myself. Throughout the event, should you have any questions, please follow these simple guidelines. Firstly, for participants who are here physically with us, feel free to just raise your hand and post your question when called upon. If you're uncomfortable with raising your question verbally, you may also text your question to the number written on the whiteboard, which you can see in the classroom. And secondly, for participants attending via Zoom, you may use the chat function to type in your questions. And in order to avoid audio feedback, we are unfortunately unable to accommodate questions being asked verbally on Zoom. So we thank you for your kind cooperation. And without further ado, now, allow me to start things off by inviting Dr. Mubarak to give his preliminary, mashallah. The word is so difficult. The preliminary.
You forgot your prelims exam.
I will just change the word to his opening remarks for the event, inshallah. Tafaddal, Ustaz.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Ma syaa Allahu kan wa ma lam yasha' lam yakun. إلهي أنت مقصودي ورضاك مطلوبي أعطني محبتك ومعرفتك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Thank you very much, Brother Chairman, Mr. Shazwan. I thought I want to give you more time to recite some more longer Quran. That is very nice for us to hear. Our voices, very boring to hear.
We're here for your sharing.
Inshallah. So, Alhamdulillah, thank you very much to NUS, the guide to goodness, Dalailul Khairat. Dalailul Khairat. Okay, so giving us the opportunity for us to share with everyone. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam bless all of us, inshallah. Amin. Now, for the preliminary remarks, he already said my preliminary remarks by reciting Surah Al-Alaq. Dah habis lah. Now, when we talk about reading, we cannot run away from Surah Al-Alaq. We cannot run away from Surah Al-Alaq. So, with that, okay, preliminary remarks here would be, is the slides there? Is the slide up? Okay, and just go next slide. Now, I'm going to talk about the 5 Gs of reading. Okay, within Surah Al-Alaq. Dia boleh lebih lah, tapi kita stop at 5. Sebab technology now at 5. So we follow the technology, so we stop at 5. We have more than that, but we stop at 5. So what are all these 5 Gs? within Surah Al-Alaq is there is theology there, there's cosmology, there's epistemology, there is teleology, there is etymology. 5G. Okay? Now, where do we get all these G's from? Right? From Surah Al-Alaq. Can you change to the next slide? Okay. Now, move the... Alright. In Surah Al-Alaq, okay, the first 5 verses, in the Surah, first 5 verses, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim, Iqra Bismi Rabbikal Ladhi Khalaq. The one that is underlined in red, that is the theology. Khalaqal insana min alaq, that talks about cosmology. Iqra wa rabbukal akram, again on theology. Alladhi allama bil qalam, allama al insan ma lam ya'lam. That is on epistemology. Okay? Then when you go to the last verse of Surah Al-Alaq, Kalla la tuti'hu wasjud waqtarib. That is teleology. Then the circles are your etymology. Now what are we talking about here? Okay, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala begins, right? Iqra bismi rabbikal ladhi khalaq. Read in the name of your Lord who creates. So therefore, the very first thing that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala reintroduced to the human being, right, is basically that there is a creator and there is creation. And this creator is being used, the characteristic or the attribute that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala used to describe himself, firstly is Rabb, who is a nourisher, sustainer, and all those. And then Khalaq, who creates. Okay? So this is under theology, it tells us about who is the creator. Then the next one, the next Iqra is again Warabbik al-Akram. So he is not just al-Khalaq, Khalaqa, Khalqun, Khaliq, but he is also Kareem. Therefore, the creation of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, Allah who is creating, creates things in honor. Whatever creation that comes out through his acts of creation, all right, has honor in them, has kareem in them, akram. So he's telling us about that. Okay? But again, this is been put together with the word ikra. And if I go to the etymology of the word ikra, that is where the root word for Quran. So what are we supposed to read? We are supposed to read the Quran. And the Quran is Qaf, Ra, Alif with the long and Nun. Right? There is an emphasis of Alif, Nun at the back, which means that as a noun, it is a continuous repetition of reading it from cover to cover. Therefore, the Islamic intellectual tradition teaches us that when we are reading, we read from cover to cover. Reading is an activity that you don't speed read, so-called. All right, you don't browse through. If you really want the essence of reading, for you to be able to reach what Allah says in terms of its purpose, and what's the purpose? The last one, last verse. You read in the name of Allah. The purpose is wasjud waqtarib, so that you sujud to Him, and therefore you will get closer to Him. And here the word is iqtaraba, from the word qaraba, qaruba. Qaruba is 3 alphabets. Iqtaraba is 5 alphabets. Within Arabic, in etymology, saya an expert lah etymology, bahasa Inggeris. Okay? So within Arabic, when you add more letters to it, the meaning becomes bigger. The meaning becomes more emphasized. So qaruba is just near. Iqtaraba is to get near. So therefore, reading Quran that is continuously will continuously brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So you have theology, you have you have teleology, which is purpose of why we are reciting. Okay? Then khalaqal insan min alaq. It is cosmology. Cosmology that tells us human being comes from alaq. Right? Segumpal darah. And of course, if you go to other verses, right, we come from nutfah. So therefore, it's cosmology in terms of how Allah has ordered the world with its hierarchy of beings, where human being is the highest human being, all right, but human being contains in him or her, all right, the elements of all other beings below it. So we contain the element of the vegetation, world. We contain the elements of the animal world. We contain the elements also of the angelic world. So it describes that whole cosmology. Where did the angelic one come? Because this was given to the Prophet, to Jibril alayhi salam. That interaction between Jibril alayhi salam to the Prophet with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the cosmology, telling us, putting us, you are the insan, okay, but you are not the only one. There is a hierarchy of beings that are there for you. Okay? Then Iqra wa rabbukal akram alladhi allama bil qalam. And this Lord who is honorable teaches you. Allama. Allama, etymology again, and you look at bil qalam. Aim lam mim, qaf lam mim. 3 letters are the same, we just change one of the letters. Within Arabic, this is one of the ishtiqaq that is called, alright, a kabir ishtiqaq. Ishtiqaq etymology in Arabic, there are 4. And this is one of them, where within the root words, alright, you just change one of the alphabets. Sometimes you change 2 of the alphabets. Sometimes you flip the alphabets. Like ilm, you flip also becomes amal. Right, so you have this flipping. Qaruba, the iqtaraba, I can split becomes qabara, kubo. You turn it, same, kubo, same root word. So when you are at kubo, you are closer. It tells us all those images that comes to us. This is the beauty of the Arabic language, the etymology of the Arabic language. Right? That's why Professor Naqib Al-Attas calls the Arabic language to be a scientific language. Prof. Osman Bakar says that the Arabic language is an algebraic language. So one uses scientific, one uses algebraic. Okay? Why? You tanya dua orang lah. Okay? Right? I'm not going to go into that. So, Alladhi allama bil qalam. So who is teaching? Allah is teaching. Allah is teaching with what? Bil qalam. What does bil qalam means? Means pen. Correct? So it could be interpreted that way you will learn when you write. So reading and writing. Cannot just read. You must read and write. Not only that, al-qalam also can mean through secondary causes. Allah teaches us through secondary causes. And what are these secondary causes? We have to go back to Surah Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman, allama al-Quran, halaqal insan, allamahul bayan. The allama is being repeated twice. And Allah introduced himself as Ar-Rahman. A sifa, an attribute which is infinitely good. Right? As teaches the Quran. So is the Ar-Rahman that is being emphasized. Not the, right, the Muntakim that is created. No, not any other names that Allah used, but Allah emphasized Ar-Rahman to be the name, all right, that does the creation and the teaching. And the teaching happens twice. The Allama happens twice there. All right, in between there is creation. Right, creation. So there is an epistemology dimension about how Allah teaches us. All right, reading and writing. All right, and Allah teaches us directly, or He can also teach us through secondary causes, which Allah gave the capacity of the secondary causes to teach us. Okay? Ada cakap semua belum? Allamal insan ma lam ya'lam, and teaches the human being whatever that they do not know. So the teaching comes from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala through Allah giving the possibility of teaching to the respective secondary causes. So we want to talk about understanding reading from an Islamic foundation. This is how we look at it. All right, from Surah Al-Alaq, with the whole purpose of reading to recognize Allah, but recognizing is not enough. That recognition must bring us to an action of sujud, an action of humility that will continuously bring us closer. Iqtaraba. I pause here for a while. Wallahu a'lam.
Inshallah, Jazakumullah khair Ustaz for Dr. Mubarak for the preliminary remarks. It has taken me quite aback actually, sitting right beside here, beside Dr. Mubarak. A lot to take in, but maybe I can just try to summarize very shortly what Dr. Mubarak has shared with us in the opening of this event. Just by looking at Surah Al-Alaq, we've managed to gather that it talks a lot about the connection between creator and creation, and that we as creation has been created in a manner that is full of honor, mashallah. And some of the interesting things that we managed to gather from Dr. Mubarak's opening is that just by looking at the word, the huruf or the letters alif nun in Quran, you can see that it actually encourages us to have continuous reading rather than, most of us, our habits, when it comes to Ramadan, okay, read the Quran. You just read, read. We don't gather anything from our reading at all, the meanings and the subtleties and all that, because we take it as just a form of habit or some sorts. But really what Dr. Mubarak shared with us is that this has to be something that's continuous. So maybe for us, as we approach Ramadan is coming closer, we can practice more continuous reading beyond the month of Ramadan throughout the year, inshallah. And then what's important from all of this reading is that we should reach a state where we are performing more sujud and to be closer to Allah. From the word that Dr. Mubarak shared with us, iqtaraba, and then after that also, Dr. Mubarak shared with us the beauty of the Arabic language itself. We can gather so much from, I think, a grammatical process called ishtiqaq. Etymology. So from just the word ilm and amal, its opposite and all that, we can gather so much relations, and yeah, it's just been very overwhelming, mashallah. And last part that I'd like to share is just the part where Dr. Mubarak mentioned about qalam, where it literally translates into pen, I believe, in the Arabic language. But just by that we can see that reading and writing comes together. It has to be this synergy between reading and writing. So these two things are not separate as we usually comprehend it to be. So alhamdulillah, that's what I managed to gather from our brief opening by Dr. Mubarak. So right now we're gonna have a listen to our second speaker for today, Mr. Ibrahim, inshallah. So I'll just pass the time to him. Mute.
الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق الخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق الهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره مقداره العظيم. How does one follow the tafsir of the Surah Alaq? Thank you for that. And thank you for placing me in this position. It's nice to be in a university setting again. Previously, as Shazwan said, I used to come here quite often with the people in the zoology and botany side of things in order to work on the Encyclopedia of Biodiversity, which was a harrowing experience. It was 2 years of working on that. But what now is looking at students, it reminds me of my time in university in the 90s. Maybe some of you are not born yet. I went to school in Ireland, and that was in the mid 90s. They still had the problems, the troubles. So the civil war between the Protestants and the Catholics. And I went to a Catholic university. And what was interesting is that the teaching of, although I studied science, philosophy was a required module. So we had to study, on top of the science subject, we had to study Aquinas, Kant, and John Stuart Mill, and all that. So there was a recognition of the importance of philosophy. And it's interesting now that also Sheikh Hamzah Yusof, in his journal, The Ranuvashu for the Zaituna College, he draws on the input from Catholic and Jewish scholars, theologians, to come together to work on his book, on his journal. So it's interesting that this continues on. But in general terms, the pursuit of truth in general society is a bit marginal, and truth is important to this appreciation of reading. So formal learning has been in universities or in other settings have been put in service of the advancement of the material sciences, especially technology. So learning has got to yield a tangible material result, such as job security or wealth creation, which is all very practical. The utilitarian approach to learning extends also into a university where there's less emphasis on a tawhidic tendency towards the many looking into the one, which is what the uni is in university. So instead, what we have is a multiplicity and infinitely granular specialization. And this is what I experienced when I did the encyclopedia, because I had to talk to the plant guys, the ant guys, the crab guys. So there was infinite dispersion and the multiplicity. So in a way, this sort of engenders or reflects our own postmodern society of individualism. And we are no longer tethered to a unifying metaphysical principle. So today, the study of metaphysics is seen as a pointless venture. Not really pointless, because one of my booksellers is a graduate of philosophy from this university. Anyway, but however you look at it in our post-truth era that we are in now, the epistemology is antagonistic to the search for universal truth and beauty. So we find ourselves that when we read a long article online, we don't read it, we skim it, and we go straight to the comment section to relish in the infinite particularities and the infinite dispersion. In this age, everyone is vulnerable to this distraction from truth. And in the words of Abdul Hakim Murad, he says, we are swayed more by Cambridge Analytica than by Cambridge University. Because the social media social media and its pull on our emotions rather than our intellect is what is driving our society and our thought space. So what are we to do? We who are aware that something is going on, that something is not quite right, what do we do? Today more than ever, reading and putting our own intellectual effort to understand reality of this world is necessary. So what are we to do? And before I can answer that, you need to hold that thought for a moment. I change gears. The one responsible and indeed accountable for our own spiritual growth is ourselves. And there are many dimensions to the spiritual path. And as I learned from Ustaz Mubarak, Imam Ghazali speaks about the intellect, the heart, the self, and the spirit. And these are all different portals to one essence, the essence of the human being. And these have all a role to play in the fulfillment of the human being. And we know that a perfectly fulfilled human being looks like. We in Islam are privileged to be able to see the completely fulfilled human being, and that is the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So in this session, we are looking at one dimension of the spiritual path, the intellectual dimension. And within this intellectual dimension, our role is to address what I like to call the gymnasium of the mind, the anytime fitness of the mind. And this is reading, because it's available to us at any time. In the West, their relationship with reading can only be described as complicated. If you look at the history of reading, it swings now and again towards the fear of the written word and its consequences vis-a-vis the tension between orality and the written tradition, the fear that the dissemination of knowledge to the masses may bring down the authority of the state or the church. And perhaps this was well placed because with the printing of the Gutenberg Bible, it sort of like fueled the Reformation and later on the fall of Christianity or the weakening of the whole of the church. And another example of this complicated relationship with reading is in the example of the first European novel in the 17th century. This is Don Quixote by Cervantes. The novel talks about the protagonist who has his head in the clouds, living in a fantasy because he's reading too much. A novel about a hero who reads too much. The prevailing idea in the society is that if you read too much, your head will be in the clouds, your limbs will become weak, and your brain goes to waste. This was a manifestation of a kind of moral panic that existed in the 17th century. They believed that too much reading was actually harmful. And this type of fantasy reading makes you believe in the world of fantasy, and then you're no longer tethered to the world. But this sort of moral panic never really occurs in Islamic civilization. This is because of the moment of revelation is anchored in the word that Ustaz Mubarak was talking about, which is Iqra. So reading for us is rooted in our tradition. And reading turned the arid Middle East into a garden of learning. Everywhere from Baghdad to Cairo to Damascus to Timbuktu, and further into the edges of the Muslim world, such as Cordoba, Bukhara, and nearer to us, Aceh. All became centers of learning. Mass literacy was not something that was feared. Rather, it was something that was encouraged, and it was a religious duty. Yet at this moment we find ourselves in this late modernity, we are all Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims alike facing a similar challenge with the rise of social media and the post-truth epistemology. And according to Frank Furedi, who wrote the book Power of Reading, there is a decline in reading because society no longer values truth. And he wrote this before the term post-truth gained currency. He already identified that the weakness of our ability to appreciate truth is the real problem why we're not reading. So postmodernism, with its dismantling of all received wisdom and expert authority, has committed a sort of epistemicide. And this is a term, again, by Abdul Hakim Murad, which he uses in his book, Traveling Home. Epistemicide is to basically kill epistemology. For an epistemology that dismantles truth cannot be called an epistemology. It is no wonder that we become trapped in our silos, looking out to the world not with confidence, but with fear. And out of fear, we abandon our own spiritual tradition and our own sophisticated technology for the purification of the heart. And this tasawwuf that connects us with the vertical. And instead, we go towards the reassuring platitudes of a new agey kind of approach that assures us that all of us are okay, keep living day by day, focus on your on what's in front of you and keep things horizontal and forgetting about the vertical element. So I come back to the question I posed earlier on, what are we to do? We who find ourselves strange pilgrims in this outpost where people have abandoned truth. Well, no surprise, we have to read. We have to engage in self-study because our peers are not reading, so we have to engage in it ourselves. We who are aware, we have to engage in self-study, seek out communities of learning. And if you can't find such a community, build one, seek out teachers who have this vision. That's the map. But start with reading. Exercise judgment, discernment, read actively and critically, flexing the muscles in your brain in this gym. According to developmental neurologist Marianne Wolf, she said reading does not come naturally to us. That's why we need to work at it. And we get better with continuous practice. The brain is incredibly plastic. We can adapt to reading very well. And as Ustaz Mubarak was alluding to when he spoke about cosmology, he spoke about how the creation of man is a pointer towards cosmology because man is a microcosm. So if man improves himself through reading, through self-reflection and self-improvement, then the world will start to heal as well. So that's something to think about. I quote Prince Ghazi, who said in his book, A Thinking Person's Guide to Our Times, there thus remains, he's talking about the guide to our times, which is basically in crisis mode now. So he said, there thus remains only one feasible option for broadening one's horizon and mind and becoming more objective and tolerant. It is this, that people should put down their mobile phones, turn off the net and the TV, but not Zoom, I suppose, and spend at least an hour every day in silent, solitary, and systematic reading. The problem with reading today is not that there is too little of it. The problem is that we are not getting much out of it. We have trouble focusing, getting distracted, and wasting our time. One of my favorite writers, Julian Barnes, says that reading is a majority skill but a minority art, meaning that few people take the trouble to work at reading, to make it beautiful, and from it to discern beauty. I'm of course talking about deep reading in this section, and this is the kind of reading that Prince Ghazi speaks about. Silent, solitary, systematic. So we need to carve out the time to read, to take notes, interrogate the text, follow arguments, identify key points, ask questions, be an active reader. You have to do this. For me, I can only cite my own practice, but you can modify it however you want. When I read for information and understanding. So I follow arguments, I take notice of jargon, terminology. I pay attention to structures of arguments because those are roadmaps. And I take fleeting notes in a notebook. And as we're saying that you need both reading and writing in order to synthesize and understand information. So you take notes when you're reading. That's how you stay active and that's how you notice things. There are some people who say that they only know what they think when they say it out, or they only know what they think when they write it out. So writing is an important tool of thought. You're not recording things. You are actually actively working things when you write. So the notes that I take when I am reading are not notes for me to refer to later, which I do, but it's more importantly the notes that I take are for me to process the information. Anyway, so I take fleeting notes when I read a book, and when I finish a chapter, I go over the notes again to clarify ideas, and sometimes I go back to the chapter. So I effectively read a chapter twice. It's very slow, but I cannot tell you how beneficial it is to go over a text twice in this way. Once with the author's words and another time with your own notes. So it takes time, and reading takes time. And in addition, when you read and you are engaged in a conversation not only with the author that you all well know, but importantly you're engaging with in a conversation with yourself. Reading is your alone time where you can be with your thoughts on any given subject. It's almost as if the subject is irrelevant because the medium is the message. So when you're reading, you're spending this time with your thoughts. And this is something that is very precious in our day and age with so much noise. So reading allows you that time to be with your thoughts. And when you read, you don't have to share every quote that you come across in a book on social media. Reading is a very private experience, and you cannot be distracted by things like sharing and things like that. You are alone with your thoughts without distractions. If you do want to share, and you can, then share later when you synthesize your own notes. Then it is more meaningful. Then you're actually sharing your ideas and your thoughts that you have constructed in the course of your reading. And this is how you grow as a reader and as a mature thinker. And I've said before, reading is like a gymnasium of the mind. But to use maybe a term more in keeping with the semantic field of Islam, reading is like the uzla you take, and it is the zawiyah of the mind. So, and Allah knows best, inshallah. That's all I have to say.
Inshallah, thank you so much, Jazakumullah khairan, Mr. Ibrahim, for sharing his opening remarks for this session. The longer I stay here, the more I feel like I'm not worthy of being in the middle of these two amazing speakers who have shared so much with me and with all of us here attending this event. Just to recap a few of the pointers that Mr. Ibrahim has shared with us, I think what caught my attention the most was when he mentioned reading as the anytime fitness of the mind. I think we always see anytime fitness all the time when we are traveling here in Singapore. And you know, the thing is of reading as something that is the exercise that our mind deserves but never actually gets because we are so turned off by it. I think for most of us, I think I'm from arts myself. When I hear the word reading itself, it's very traumatic actually.
Someone who is doing English and you feel traumatic with the word reading.
Yes, unfortunately. Thank God for me, alhamdulillah, I have more things to do with grammar, so I don't really read that much words per se. So that's my escape. But the point is that, you know, when we have to read, it almost becomes something so traumatic for us that we are afraid of this word reading itself. And then we are not able to give time to it. Like what Mr. Ibrahim has shared with us, reading is it's a slow process. We need to put time into it. And I think he quoted by, I think, his favorite speaker, his favorite author. In her book, reading is a majority skill but a minority art. So that's such a beautiful quote, I feel, because not many of us are willing to put this time. And I think Mr. Ibrahim also shared with us a few tips that is very useful. And just one last point about how Mr. Ibrahim mentioned in Dr. Abdul Hakim Murad in his book Traveling Home, this concept of epistemicide, if I got that correctly, epistemicide, the death of epistemology itself. I think most of us, as we attend, courses in the university, we are so carried away with this idea about, postmodernism, the post-truth era and all that. We give in to this so-called, if I may say, Western concepts or Western ideas of knowledge, and we abandon this rich Islamic tradition that we actually have that prides upon reading itself. Like what we heard earlier from Dr. Mubarak, reading is a constant and continuous process, just in the word Quran, our holy book that is. From there, we can get so much that, reading is so important in our religion. And I think with that, it sets the stage very nicely for us to, embark on our forum part for this event, inshallah. And I'll just kick things off with the first question to start off the discussion. So when they were sharing, I was just wondering, like, we in our reading, we classify certain questions as, certain readings as Islamic texts and some as non-Islamic texts. On the outset, it's quite easy to say, like, a fiction novel would be non-Islamic, and then a book by a classical author in Islam would be an Islamic text. But actually, is there a different approach or method that we should adopt when reading these different texts? Or actually, is there even a difference in the beginning between Islamic and non-Islamic texts? Maybe you can get Dr. Mubarak to start the sharing first. We give Mr. Ibrahim a short rest after sharing. So, tafadhal Ustaz.
Is there a difference between, is there a need to differentiate between Islamic text or non-Islamic text? Right. It's yes and no. Right? It's yes and no. No, as in that it is knowledge. Knowledge belongs to Allah, is His creation. Right? So for everything that you read is knowledge in itself. Okay. Yes, because that some of those things that are being written are written not from a philosophy that puts God in the center. And some texts are written, right, with the objective of espousing on truth, whereas others, they are on espousing or hiding truth. So therefore, when we are reading, if I want to classify, generally, this is a sweeping statement, right? This is a sweeping statement. If I want to classify generally, when I talk about subjects in Islamic studies that are written by Orientalists, I need to be slightly more careful in how I read the text and what I can take in and not, by knowing who is the author, who is this Orientalist, all right? Know what are the which classification of Orientalists he is in, okay? And then when we read it with a critical mind and see which are the things which he is subtly telling us his own idea about what Islam is all about. Okay? If we are reading so-called non-Islamic texts, okay, or we call it academic text or subject matters that does not deal with ulum sharia, right? Does not deal with ulum sharia. How do we approach it? Okay, if we look at the classification of knowledge and goes back, all right, to epistemology of our Islamic intellectual sciences, intellectual sciences are also part, all right, of the whole framework of ilm. Any subject matter is basically studying Allah's creation. Any subject matter that is written is basically unraveling the mysteries and the treasures of Allah's af'al. So I read botany, or I read zoology, or I read sociology. What am I studying? The thing is talking about an aspect of Allah's creation. So therefore, when we are reading that, we come from that perspective. Then you will see the beauty of Allah's creation within it. And you see how the asma of Allah, all right, is being manifested within that creation. Now, whether the foundation, when you have that, when you approach, you can see which messages that is been written by the authors are something which we don't need to take. I can take the details of it. Right? I can take all the details because those detailing are basically the unraveling of the complex structure of our cosmology. But it's underlying assumptions, it's underlying philosophy. When we approach it with that, with the niyah that it is wasjud waqtarib, with that niyah, in whatever text that we go in, it itself will comes to us that we know that this is something that I need to be careful of. Can take all the details, but not the assumptions and the philosophy. And you as an expert or being trained in that particular area, that's where you can reformulate the way on how you build this detailed knowledge on a foundation of Islamic metaphysics or Islamic philosophy. We need more people. We need more people who are graduates from NUS, graduates from NTU in their respective faculties to be able to read the signs of the world of nature. Here I'm using the term the world of nature referring to all fields of studies that is down here. From that eyes and that lens of Islamic metaphysics, from a lens of Islamic epistemology. There cannot be one person who is going to be able to do all. It's impossible. Right? So the answer to that question is yes and no. Yes from my perspective, no from another perspective. Wallah Rasulullah.
Shukran, Ustaz, Dr. Mubarak, for your response to the question. I think one important point that we should take away is that towards the end, Dr. Mubarak mentioned that we need more graduates from specialized fields to interpret this natural world knowledge, if we may put it that way, the so-called non-Islamic text through an Islamic metaphysical lens, so that we may be able to help to synthesize that knowledge with the proper lens from our religion, that is, and then make that knowledge more accessible to others. And I would like to invite Mr. Ibrahim, if you have any response to the earlier question. Should we differentiate between Islamic and non-Islamic texts? And is there a different approach to do so?
I don't really make a distinction between Islamic and non-Islamic texts. I make a distinction between fiction and non-fiction. Well, I don't really call it fiction as well. I tend to look at them as stories, because stories can be fiction, stories can be true. So I read instructional texts or classical texts for understanding and for learning something new. And I read stories to learn about different cultures and different ways of being and different lives of people I will never meet and in circumstances I will never know. So this is a different sort of learning. So both contribute to learning, but both have different styles of learning. I don't really take notes when I'm reading fiction, but it does have an important role to play, I feel. But they're different, but they serve a different purpose. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ibrahim. I think what Mr. Ibrahim shared with us is that his distinction is more about whether it's a story or a non-story.
Yeah.
A story and a non-story. And stories actually allow us to connect with cultures, peoples that we may not ever meet in our life. The world is so big, we're only stuck in this red dot. So like stories allow us this connection to the outside world, so to speak. Yeah, and if we combine that with what Ustaz Dr. Mubarak has shared with us earlier, when we go in with the niyat, wasjud wa qatarib that we saw earlier from Surah Al-Alaq, to be closer to Allah, then I think that makes the whole approach to reading itself very, very simple. If we go with that niyat, then we discard things that may not align with those with that niyat, and then we take those that can be beneficial for us. And even reading stories, learning about other cultures, this is what has been encouraged by our religion, to get to know people of different, we've all created differently and we are encouraged to get to know each other. So I think that's a beautiful sort of wrap up to that question. We'll move to our next discussion point. So this question is, goes like this. Should we only read books that are supposedly meant for our level of comprehension and understanding? If not, what kind of mindset should we adopt in reading? That is, if I may break it down a bit, is there maybe a way to identify if a certain level of reading or certain book is meant for us, or maybe this is a bit too difficult for us? How may we approach that topic?
Can I ask a question to the questioner? Yourself, question is about whether are we prepared to read a text, right? Whether we can understand that level and all that. Can we ever reach a level of understanding of the Quran? Can we? No, right? But are we not supposed to read it? We are supposed to read it over and over again. Over and over again, we are supposed to read the Quran. And nobody will ever say and dare to say that I have comprehended the Quran in its wholesomeness. Nobody is going to dare to say that. No Mufassir has also declared that my tafsir is the tafsir. No one will do that. There's no other book that is bigger than the Quran. Right? And the Quran, that's our culture. Remember, the Quran set the stage on how we read the whole process. It sets the stage for all of us. We go back to that. Right? So therefore, right, do we only read books which is only to our level of comprehension? And then I baca buku ABC je lah. No. We have to go further and further and further and further. More difficult text, more difficult text. Then the next question will be asked. Do I need a teacher to read a book? That will be a follow-up question. Do I need a teacher to read a book? Then I ask again. Do we 100 all the time when we are reading the Quran, there's a teacher in front of us checking our pronunciation? All the time? Tak ada lah. Kalau gitu tak baca pun kita. Siapa yang pergi ngaji lagi sekarang? Right? But yes, we had a teacher at the very beginning to teach us how to read. Then when we have learned the tools of it, we continue reading on our own. Correct? Okay. The reading of the Quran is of different levels. At any levels that you want to go up, you need to be given the tools. That's where you need to go and look for the teacher. If I have finished reading the first qira'ah, I want to go to another qira'ah, I need to go and find a teacher to teach me the second qira'ah. Then after that, I can read on my own. When the teacher has cleared me. Now, it's the same thing for other books, especially our classical books. Our classical books, our scholars wrote the books for people to read, not to be kept in the shelf. It's meant to be read. But yes, you need some form of preparation. You need the tools to prepare you for you to be able to assess the text before you read others. All NUS students, can all of us read quantum book, quantum physics? No, we can't. Because we are not prepared to read quantum physics. But I give him difficult literature book, he can read. He will understand. Kita terkial-kial nak baca. Ni apa benda ni? Every single word kena buka dictionary. But dictionary pun tak ada, kena pergi classical dictionary sama to read and understand. Right? But some of us in other areas, we already know the technical terms in it because we are trained in it. So we need that training. Once you have the training, the tools is there, we move. But we need to be humble enough. That's why the wasjud waqtarib is important. Because that wasjud will keep us humble enough to go and ask for help. To go and look for someone who is more knowledgeable than us in order to push us into more difficult texts. So yes, we cannot go and today don't go back and straight away take out Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, Fususul Hikam and read. Right? Or you go to Ashifa of Ibn Sina to go and read. You will not understand a thing of it. I remember when I was in JC, I took Satanic Verse out. Salman Rushdie's book. I took that book. Right? Baca first page. Ni apa benda dia berbual ni? I don't understand. Put it away. And I took Prof. Osman Bakar's book, Classification of Knowledge, when I was at A level. Also cannot understand. Because was not ready yet. I did not have the tools to assess these books. But after the training that you get, then you can assess all the books. But now I still cannot assess some books. Belum lagi. Belum sampai lagi. Right? Kind of book that I'm not able to assess. I'm not able to assess deep Sufi poetry books. Deep Sufi poetry books. Not ready yet. Right? To be able for us to make that kind of connections. Right? Yeah, you can read Faruddin Attar, Conference of the Bird. You can read Mantiqut Tayr of Ibn Sina and all that. But really deep going into it, not ready yet. Don't have the tools. Have not met a correct teacher. My teacher passed away. Almarhum Professor Said Ajmal Al-Aidrus. May Allah bless him. All right, a great man, all right, of literature who translated the whole of Maulana Jalaluddin Ar-Rumi as Masnawi in 10 months. in 10 months. The whole 6 books of Masnawi or Maulana Rumi he translated. Will help him in reading, checking all the footnotes and all that are all correct as his students. He was one of those that was training us how to read Sufi poetries. But may Allah bless his soul, inshallah. So it's again a yes and a no. It's again a yes and a no. Okay? This yes and no technique I learned from Prof. Osman. Whenever I ask Prof. Osman, he will say yes and no. Okay, Prof. Yes, what's the yes, what's the no? that is where you learn from your teacher how to think. Not every question is that direct. So he taught me that the question will have different perspectives. So it's where you learned. Yeah, you need that guy, you need the teacher. But at the same time, you have to push yourself. So join our book club. Boleh?
Yes. What Ustad opened with, I was talking about the Quran. It reminded me of a story of an encounter with a customer in the bookshop. He's a native English speaker, and it's important to mention this. He's a native English speaker. He's a convert to Islam, and he wanted a book of translation of the Quran, which I gave him a translation of the Quran, a good translation of the Quran. Then he came back a few months later and said thank you for the recommendation of the tafsir of the translation of the Quran. And I learned something new. I learned that the month of August is very special to Islam. Then I said, the month of August is special to Islam? Yes, because all the time God is mentioned, he says, God is the August and the wise. Azim. The August, the translation used the word August as Azim.
Azim.
So I reminded him that the word August has got a different meaning, which is the splendor. So you can immediately see in his face that the penny dropped, and then you could see that there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. And I've seen that flicker of fear because you sort of doubt your own comprehension of text. And this is the Quran. You have to read the text. You have to read the Quran. Although you may make some fundamental errors, such as thinking that August is an important sacred month. But it is important for you to read nonetheless. But having said that, I always encounter this in my shop where people even refuse to read simple books of the Sirah of the Prophet ﷺ, which is a story which they can follow. It's a story of a human being. But they opt instead of looking for books meant for children of the Sirah, because they say they don't have a teacher and don't want to be led astray. But the problem is you are led into this intellectual paralysis. Don't be guided by fear, fear of not understanding. So you have to go forward, and it is dangerous. There are risks associated with reading anything. But you cannot stay in this playground where you have padded edges and soft cushions, and everything is sand. So when you fall, you don't break any bones. You can't have that, because you have to venture forth, because the world is not waiting for you. While you are refusing to develop your mind, you are being bombarded by the media with a cultural hegemony that is at odds with your own, and a postmodern ideas that would make even the strongest classical theologian of Islam's past tremble. What we're facing now, what we are facing every day, would make them tremble. So you have to arm yourself and develop your mind. We don't have the luxury. We don't have the luxury of saying, I just want to stick with Ilyas and Doug learns about zakat. You have to step up, and you have to do it for yourself and your own community. But when you do start reading with intention, things will open up. You start meeting like-minded people. You start building a community. Teachers come into your orbit. It's the intention of starting, it's the intention of going through, but do not be trapped in the intellectual paralysis that stems from fear. You have to pick up a book, be open to the possibilities of knowledge, and be open to the possibilities that come your way that will guide you towards learning. So that's what I think.
Thank you, Dr. Mubarak and Mr. Ibrahim, for the response to that earlier question. In the spirit of Dr. Mubarak's yes/no answer, I've also gathered that the answer to this question is actually yes/no, and the response we got is actually also some sort of yes/no. So to begin, we'll start with what Mr. Ibrahim just shared at the end of his part. He said we have to go with the right intention, and with this right intention, then opportunities will open up for us. We'll find the right teachers, we'll find the right opportunities, get to know like-minded people, and then we can start to read and embark on tougher texts. And then also to go back to what Dr. Mubarak mentioned earlier, is that sometimes when we read, we need to be humble enough to know that this is no longer for me. I just can't understand this. We have to put it aside first, get the proper training, which fares very nicely with what Mr. Ibrahim has shared. When you go in with the right intention, and then you identify with the right intention that maybe that reading, that level of text is not good for us. As in good as in we are not able to process it, so it won't be much benefit to us. Then with that intention, then inshallah, Allah will open for us an opportunity to meet the right teachers, to meet the right people who may have experience reading that book, then to point us in the right direction. Okay, you can get more information or more knowledge or circles of learning that's focusing on this book with the right teacher, and then we can progress. So I think it falls back very strongly upon our niyat of reading itself. And we have to begin with the niyat as with everything we've covered in the past G2Gs. So many years of G2G we have learned, it always goes back to the intention. So I think that was a very beautiful response to the question by both our speakers. And I think we can take some questions from our online attendees here. I think our physical attendees are quite quiet. Oh, sorry, Zaki, you have a question. Then we'll go to the online question. Yes. What are some etiquettes or spiritual practices that we possess in the Islamic tradition that we can do for maybe reading? Zaki, were you addressing your question to any particular speaker? Okay, both. I'll just repeat our brother Zaki's question first for the benefit of our online attendees. So brother Zaki here asks, are there any etiquettes or spiritual practices that we may observe when we approach reading, general reading, general forms of reading? Are there any particular etiquettes? Because when it comes to the Quran, we know we have to be in wudu and all that, proper approach to it, but does this apply to other types of reading? Any of our speakers would like to?
I would say yes. The Quran we use wudu. Again, the Quran is that benchmark. The Quran is that benchmark. Right? So if Quran we use wudu, and that is wajib. Okay. So of course the rest is not to the level of wajib. Right? It's highly recommended because wudu is nur. Knowledge is nur. So only the nur can recognize another nur. And we want the knowledge to get into our akal and heart, which is also described as nur. So only the nur can get to the nur, and only the nur can recognize another nur. So that is the most important basic etiquette. Okay? And of course the second one is the intention. The second one is the intention. Third one, if you are reading a classical text, a Muslim text, right? Send Fatiha to the author. We send Fatiha to the author, and we ask Allah that, right, we get benefit from the author, and the author gets benefit from all the benefits that we are doing in getting the knowledge that we are getting from it. And then after that, you can start your reading. Allah Rasulullah. But sorry, probably you want to ask, must I face the Qibla? Not necessary, yeah. Okay, not necessary. Okay, but you have to be physically prepared. Physically prepared. Quran, you have to sit properly. You read lying down, gone. Not read lying down means tidur. That's the thing. So the kind of physical preparation is all the same. The seriousness and all. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the etiquette of things, but I can only comment on habitual things. Like for me, I find that it's best to read early in the morning, because once your day starts going, you're not gonna get much done, and you're gonna get a lot of distractions in the way. So early morning reading, or for an hour, is quite beneficial. And um, what I find when you read in the morning is, if you read like a difficult text in the morning, the rest of your day, when you're in between things, you tend to think about what you read earlier that day. So you have the whole day to process it. If you, in the same way, if you read a difficult text at night, you're not going to get much sleep because it's going to be quite. So, so it's a good thing to do it in the morning. So it's nice to the rest of your day. So you're floating above the mundane. You're doing your mundane stuff, but you're also thinking about these things that Imam Ghazali was talking about, or Ibn Sina was talking about. So it's an interesting layer to your day. I don't know. Just my own observation. It doesn't answer your question on etiquette, but it's already completely answered by Ustaz.
Thank you, Ustaz and Mr. Ibrahim. Ustaz shared out very practical tips how we can do it. Just take the Quran as our benchmark, and everything we do after that will be basically highly recommended, which means it's a good thing, alhamdulillah. And then what Mr. Ibrahim has shared with us is that we can be strategic with our reading. This is an important skill, I think. When he shared that brilliant advice, it just surprised me that I never thought of that. You know, when we read something difficult in the morning, then we have the whole day to think about it. And we read at night, we're just going to go to sleep after that. Or we may not sleep at all, knowing our very poor patterns these days. But anyhow, we're just going to move on.
But it's true. When I read, if I read Al-Ghazali at night, I will not be sleeping. I can't sleep. If I take that 1 hour at night and take one classical text, which is difficult, I cannot sleep. I really cannot sleep. But unfortunately, I cannot read in the morning because I'm teaching. You have the chance when you are students.
Okay, so I think we'll just move on to our. I think we have 2 questions in the chat, and just nice. I think we're about to end soon also.
What time is supposed to end?
We are planning to end about 9:20, inshallah. Okay, maybe we'll see what our head here decides for us, inshallah. But let's move on to the questions.
No, we can continue to till midnight, no problem. This is part of reading.
Okay, so we have an interesting question here in our chat from, I think, one of our attendees online. So I'll just read the question and try to link it to our discussion, inshallah. On the topic of reading, what can you say about Sufi literature like of Rumi, Jami', I'm not sure, and Shams Tabriz? And they seem to allure the soul to things that are metaphysical, something I would call untouchable by the rational intellect. So the Quran itself, just by listening to it without actually knowing the translation, is enough to allure the soul in rational ways as well. And I think earlier, Mr. Ibrahim was sharing with us a lot about, seeking the truth and the intellect. Would you consider this case, when we read spiritual kind of text, as a limitation of the intellect, maybe?
No. The intellect. As I was saying earlier, these are all pathways to the heart, the mind, the heart, the soul, the spirit. These are all interconnected. In some ways, you need to think of them as compartments, and in other ways, you need to think of them as pointing towards one essence. So they do influence each other, and I don't think reading Rumi shuts down the rational component because it activates it, in fact. Because spirituality ensures that the intellectual faculty is sharpened. And because that's what a pure heart is, your perceptive organ is sharpened by a sensitivity to spirituality. So it doesn't cancel each other out. In fact, it's synergistic. If I'm understanding the question.
I think
Yeah, okay.
I will just add to what Brother Ibrahim says. Al-Farabi says this, right? The Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The sharpness of the intellect is directly proportional. That was my word, okay? Using mathematical terms, okay? Is directly proportional to the purity of the soul. It's directly related. The purer the soul, the sharper will be the mind. The sharper will be the intellect instead of the mind. The mind is a Western concept. Rational is a Western concept. The whole idea of intellect within the Islamic intellectual tradition, which we possess, has a cognitive faculty. It's not just that brain with all the neurons and the dendrites. No, it's more than that. Okay, we have a whole risalah of aql, a risalatul aql by Al-Farabi, right? That talks about that. You have a whole risalah on the aql by Ibn Sina, right? And Imam Al-Ghazali also talks about the aql in chapter 7 of Kitabul Ilm of his Ihya Ulumuddin, right? So the whole idea of aql is more than just that small dimension of rationality that we now are so proud of in the post-truth era. So therefore, spirituality, right, because it is purifying your heart, it sharpens the mind. So the assumption of Al-Farabi, right, when as a philosopher, when he said that you are able to reach the truth without the need of a revelation, is under the assumption that the aql is a pure aql. An aql that is not controlled by the desire. That's the assumption that he has. Our aql are controlled by the desires. And the metaphor and the description that Imam Al-Ghazali gives, right, on how the function of the aql as the prime minister, right, in his kitab Ajaibul Qalb, the marvels of the heart, one of the most difficult texts in Ihya Ulumuddin for us to read that. Okay, that whole description that he gave, okay, because the heart is like the king. The aql, the prime minister, is corrupted, that's it, all gone. Right? But the heart is the one, but the heart needs to know how to direct the prime minister. Needs to be able to understand the prime minister. If the heart itself, is being covered with desires, then you will leave the prime minister alone to do whatever he wants. I'm not referring to any prime minister, okay? Right? Not referring to any prime minister. But that was the metaphor that Imam Al-Ghazali uses to show that relationship. But Ibrahim says that 4 things that we have: the aql, the heart, the nafs, and the ruh. The functionality of the essence of the human being. That he uses the term latifa as the essence of the human being that has these 4 functional role within the human being. Allahu Alam. So,
inshallah, beautiful sharings by our speakers. Once again, I may just quickly wrap up that response. Is that we explored how there is actually a synergy between our intellect and our heart, and we once again shouldn't view this as separate entities. In that, if we sharpen one, the other will also benefit from it in a sense. And what we get is that by immersing in spirituality, it actually helps us to sharpen our mind. And that in the ending of Ustaz's sharing earlier, we heard how in the Ihya Ulumuddin, one of the chapters, there is the marvels of the heart. One of the books. One of the books in Ihya Ulumuddin. There's this concept where the heart is the king and the aql is the prime minister. And of course, with our very basic of understanding of governments and how it works, these two should be working hand in hand for the proper functioning of a country or a nation. So in that sense, how we should view these things is that it's really very related. And this synergy is what we should aim to get at for us to really benefit from this topic that we are discussing, which I've already actually lost track of. What were we talking about? Yes, reading.
Maulana Rumi.
Naam. Reading about Maulana Rumi and spirituality and all this, how they link up together. And I think just to wrap things up, I think we can take this one last question, and it is our last question in the chat. This one takes us a bit further away from what we just discussed earlier, but still related in our opportunity. Oh, we just got one more question. Let me just quickly take a look.
Pukul 12 kan sampai pukul 12. Itu Saturday tak sekolah, tak kerja.
Okay, inshallah we'll take these last two questions. Our apologies to our attendees online and our attendees here also. We were not able to address all.
If they have question, let them ask.
Okay, inshallah. Okay, so Ustaz wants us to answer all the questions.
No, but sorry, your booking, you got booking yang weird, right?
No. Okay, inshallah we will take a look at the online questions. Okay, ini apa betul? Okay, so just take the first one first. What do we say to a teenager who doesn't care about Islamic duty? I think a lot of the concept we talked about was quite big. If you were to tell a teenager reading is an Islamic duty, it's an obligation, then I think they might be quite frightened. So what do we say to them when they say reading is very boring, I don't want to do this? I think with some of us becoming teachers, parents even, this may be something that we may come across in the near future. So maybe we can get one of our speakers to share.
Every day I see that.
Yes, sir.
Every day I experience that. Morning reading in school, people just stone in front of the book. Then they sleep. That's the reality of it. That's the reality of it. Alright? It's a process. It's a process. Okay? Of course, for teenagers, you don't go and give tough books. Let them pick up books which they love to read. Which they love to read. Almarhum Prof. Ajmal told us when he was young, he and his elder brother will always be competing with one another, alright, to finish a book so that they can summarize it to their father and then be rewarded. That was last time. So he told us that. So yeah, that's one way on doing it. I tried with my two boys. It works for a while. Then after that, they hilang. Then got to change the reward. If the reward is the same, tak pakai. Got to change the reward. See what is the trend that they are looking at. Then we change the reward and see how. Okay. And I got my children said, Abi, I'm not going to read your boring books. Okay. They told me, I'm not going to read your boring books. I'm going to read other books. Okay, Ramai, you read other books first. Because I get into those kind of reading also not at their age. Right? Those kind of heavy reading on Islamic classical texts. Right? Is later part, right? When we are more mature and all that, and we are prepared to do it. Then yes, so easy for to cultivate, not easy. But as a parent, right, if the one that is asking is a parent, you have to model it. You must model it. That is very important. And two of my daughters said, finally they said, Abi, I think we kena influenced by you already. All the books around the house. We are influenced by you already. That's so it shows, right, the importance of us reading in front of them. Same thing. You want them to read the Quran, we have to read in front of them. There's no tawadu in front of your children. There's no such thing as tawadu in front of your children. No, I read when they are asleep. Duduk tawadu apa ketuk kepala. We have to model it in front. Yeah. If you are doing sunnat fasting, you have to tell them that you are fasting sunnah. Then they will learn why you are fasting sunnah. That's how we educate these people. We educate our children that way, by telling them and modeling to them. Okay? Allah.
In my opening remarks, I was saying that the problem with the decline in reading is because of the declining in the valuing of truths. That holds true for all people, including children. But for children as well, there is another element because their concerns may not necessarily be truth. Their concern is maybe to some extent, a lot of the children of the current generation are a bit too self-absorbed. So when you are too self-absorbed, you have little interest in learning about the lives of others. You have no interest in the lived experiences of others. And therefore you won't read your Enid Blyton, or you won't read your any other stories because you have no vested interest in learning about something else, because there's too much of this self-absorption. So in a way, I'm trying to say that the problems are a bit intractable. They are beyond the scope. I've been asked this several times, and I keep saying that it's beyond the scope of a bookseller, or beyond the scope of the whole society needs to wake up to this idea that truth is important, empathy and radical compassion towards the other are important values. Then there can be reading. So it's I don't know what's the solution to this, to the fall in reading. But what is interesting, Dr. Mubarak was sharing, is that the daughters tend to read, and for some reason, in my bookshop, I've been observing about upwards of 90% of my customers are women. This is quite scary, especially when you're talking about how fathers need to model for the families. The dads are not reading, and so it's a problem, and you have to start somewhere, as what Prince Ghazi was saying. If you want to make the change, then you have to start it yourself by reading yourself. They have to see, children need to see what the reading life of adults look like. This is very important. So it's a really uphill task. I don't know what happened that we lost all this. But we need to reconnect with it, because as we keep saying, it is rooted in our tradition, and it's ours to lose if we lose this reading thing.
Let me just add one more thing. One important thing, if the person is asking is a mother or a father, please don't forget to make dua for your child. Okay, this really work. Why I said that? I hate reading. I hate reading in primary school. I hate reading in secondary school. I even failed my GP at GCE A level, being an S paper student. I mean H3's paper. That time was S paper. Right? Having 2 S paper, H3 subjects, I failed GP because I just hate reading. Right? But my mom will continuously tell me, mak doa kau baca. Mak doa kau baca. Now my mother said to me, dulu kau tak nak baca buku. Sekarang buku kau berkoyan-koyan. I told my mom, don't stop the doa, don't change the doa. Don't doa that I stop buying books. I don't want that. Yeah. So it really works, the doa down there. It takes time, yes, it will take time, but the parents' doa is very important. Right? All are marriageable ages already in front of me. And you're setting up your family, so make sure you have that in mind. Okay.
Shukran Ustaz and Mr. Ibrahim. So what we see here is that the problem is really there to stay, unless we do something about it. So shout out to the men here. Better make your way to Waranda Bookstore more frequently, so Mr. Ibrahim can see that we are doing our part, inshallah.
And make your way to the book club.
Naam, the book club. We will be talking about that in the announcements later also.
We have a silent book club that we do. We have a silent book club every Sunday morning. I'm the only guy. It's
Serious?
crazy. Yeah.
Serious?
It's at 8 a.m.
You're the
on
only
Sunday
guy.
morning.
Allah Akbar.
I'm the only guy.
Dia pergi pasar lah.
Hopefully, hopefully.
The guys semua pergi pasar lah hari Minggu
At least
pagi.
something beneficial lah. So, yeah, so with that, let's take our last, another question appeared. Allahu Akbar. Okay, let's see. I think these two questions are quite related. I'll try to relate it so that it becomes one question.
Got no question.
Yeah, I will say this question and see if it answers if you may have question. But if you want to ask, please raise your hands here. No raised hands. Okay. Bismillah. So, Salam, as mentioned earlier by Ustaz and Mr. Ibrahim, we need proper tools to equip us in reading difficult texts. Sometimes these difficult texts include popular books from Wardah. I don't know why there was that mention. Okay, having said that, I think what the person asking meant was that I think a lot of people are reading, so we should also be reading because it's popular. Like everyone knows this book. Okay, and having said that, are there certain platforms and channels that are easily accessible for us to refer to commentaries from the author or qualified religious teachers to make this text more digestible? I think Mr. Ibrahim earlier was mentioning about Renovation, also certain journals and things that can make things. Actually, maybe Renovation is not that. Anyways, are there maybe like strategies or maybe accessible platforms that we can access to, make some of these tougher and more popular texts more digestible for us, in your experience and opinion?
Other platforms in order to go through a book. Certainly, you can go into the bibliography of a text and to look at the how ideas develop, how the genesis of ideas develop. I'm not really keen on platforms such as Goodreads or any other, because those are basically social media, and they don't really help in understanding us. They do help. I have to be fair, they do help, but you ultimately need to traverse the path of the book yourself. I always say this: we all can have the same book, but we all read different books. The words are the same, the text is the same, and as what your friend has, but we all read different books because there's a thing for the benefit of people in this room.
9:30 je, dah habis.
We all bring into books our own lived experiences, and it's important to tease out, or it's important to work through the problems as you read the text. Kind of like no shortcuts.
Can I just add a bit? Oh, kepak dia.
Yang
Oh, this
discounted,
one,
I think the school.
Now, I'm not sure what kind of text you are referring to, right? When you go over to Wardah and all that. But then, of course, if you are talking about Islamic intellectual text, classical text, and all that, right? Of course, there is a certain pathway that you need to take, right? Please don't go and take Ibn Sina's books first. Okay? Before you finish reading, before at least you know, alright, Al-Ghazali a bit. So, in reading classical text, you need this. But then, if you are reading secondary sources, that should be fine. You don't really need that much kind of help. The secondary sources are usually there to help you with the classical text. I couldn't go into Futuhat Makkiyah of Ibn Arabi on my own. It's like lost in jungle in Temburong in Brunei. Okay, it's lost in jungle of Temburong in Brunei, right? So I have to go to Professor William Chittick's work, right? SPK, Supi Path of Knowledge and Self-Disclosure, okay, in order for me to get some form of compass on how to navigate that primary source. So secondary sources
right, is not an issue for us to pick up. Yes, some of the secondary sources, the language is a bit more tougher. If you go and pick Professor Al-Attar's book first, and then you pick Professor Osman Bakar's book first, or Professor Hussain Nasr's book, yeah, the languages are a bit more tough, but you can go through it. You have to read it over and over again. When I was doing my PhD, Prof. Osman Bakar classification of knowledge, not 2 page. The second, the third chapter on Al-Farabi, I do not know how many times I go over it over and over and over and over and over again. And that is also something which Ibn Sina did when he was reading the work on metaphysics of Al-Farabi. He said, I read that book 40 times of the metaphysics and I didn't understand. After I memorized it. I memorized it. He was reading the metaphysics of Aristotle that he couldn't understand. Then he found someone, right, dekat kedai, kat market, someone who has no money, has this book, wants to sell to him. Alright, so that he can get the money and buy food. Alright, at first he doesn't want to buy. Ibn Sina doesn't want to buy. Yeah? But then that person forced him to buy. Then when he looked at it, he got a shock. It was Al-Farabi's book on Isharah of Aristotle, metaphysics. He bought it, he read it, straight away he understood what Aristotle wanted to say about it. So a big person like, a big scholar like Ibn Sina, 40 times he read, he doesn't understand Aristotle. Kita baca 1000 kali tak faham memang biasa. No problem lah. It's like that lah. So a classical book, yes. Sometimes you need secondary sources to help you. Secondary sources you can go on your own. You can go. Allah.
I can add a bit to that because a lot of these pointers you can actually derive from the introduction, the author's introduction to a book. You can tell from the author's introduction whether this book is for you or whether it's difficult for you, because good books would encapsulate a lot of the ideas in the introduction. So you can tell very quickly whether it's for you. I can probably tell you that looking at the blurb is not the place to understand the book. If you want to understand the level of the book, look at the contents page and look at the introduction and look at the bibliography for you to understand what level the book is. Seldom is the blurb. But yeah, the introduction is important.
Thank you, Ustaz and Mr. Ibrahim, for that sharing. Just to mention one quick point, I think one good thing or what I enjoy at Wardah is that usually almost all the books that are provided will have a version that is not wrapped, so that we can actually take a look inside. Like what Mr. Ibrahim shared, the important part is to read the introduction if you have the time. Sometimes when we go to the more mainstream bookstores, they may have a lot of those books, but they are all wrapped, and then there's no way for us to access it except through buying it. Now there are a lot of apps that you can use where you can actually read from library. Anyway, yeah, I think we have one more last question. Anas, is it okay? We should stop. Okay, I think yeah, because our computer here has also been shut down for those online. So I think we'll just wrap it up. Any final comments by our speakers to share with some tips for us to be better readers, insyaAllah?
Banyak ada tips.
I think Ustaz said berapa banyak ada tips. A lot of tips already given. So if you didn't take down notes, that is your loss.
It's recorded, right?
Nah,
People always record now lah, but they never listen again.
That's also true. Alhamdulillah. So okay. Yes, we'll be sharing the recording on our YouTube channel, inshallah, after we gain the permission from our speakers, and maybe we'll get through. Yeah.
Need permission lah.
Okay, so with that,
He needs permission from you.
with that, our short forum discussion has actually come to an end, inshallah. Time actually flies when you're having fun. Also when you're attending Anytime Fitness in your mind with us today. And beyond just fun, I hope that everyone here has managed to gain some beautiful new insights about readings, because I personally feel that tonight has been really, really fruitful for us. It's week 8. We all need a break from thinking about things, but alhamdulillah, we get to think about new ways to think about reading, to get to the end of the SEM together as one people, one nation, one Singapore. And of course, Not to forget, I'd like to extend our sincerest gratitude to our esteemed speakers this evening, Dr. Mubarak and Mr. Ibrahim, for gracing us not only with your wonderful presence, but also knowledge and the multiple takeaways for us to contemplate upon as we embark on our journey to become active and constant readers after this, inshallah. And while you may not do justice to the benefits that we have gained from the both of you, our team at G2G would actually like to share a very small, humble token of appreciation to both Dr. Mubarak as well as Mr. Ibrahim for guiding us through this evening session. Jazakumullah khairul jaza. I will just pass you very quickly. So this is actually our. I'll just pass you. Alright, we have a notebook with the Hijrah Guide to Goodness logo in the front.
Dalam ada Dalailul Khairat tak?
Tak ada. That one can get at Wardah Books. Bismillah. And for Mr. Ibrahim Tahir. Okay, thank you. Our notebook with our logo in front. Photo inshallah. Alright, thank you so much. Shukran jazilan. Alhamdulillah, thank you so much to our respected speakers. And now I'd like to take the opportunity to share a few quick announcements. Unfortunately, our computer has died, so we are not able to show it on the screen. But our next G2G session entitled The Mosque and Oasis of Spirituality will be held next Friday, inshallah, 19th of March. The same hybrid format as today. There will be a physical, okay, we have it on screen, Hamza. It will be available as physical as well as an online event, same as today. Same place, same time, so don't forget to sign up if you're interested and to share it with your friends and family. Also, if you're not aware of it yet, as mentioned earlier in our forum discussion, Dr. Mubarak and Wardah Books have actually been working very closely together in having the Islamic Civilization Book Club, hosted by Wardah Books, which aims to promote systematic and serious reading about Islamic civilization. So these are pointers that we covered earlier actually, as well as to introduce the scope and depth of Islamic civilization. This book club encourages purposeful conversations between readers who are reading the same book. So what are you waiting for, people? If you're interested, make sure you go to the website of Wardah Books. There's a lot of details there. I just checked just now. So get yourself enrolled. Mr. Ibrahim, you don't have to enroll. You don't have to enroll. Just go for it. Okay?
Just buy the book and read.
Buy the book. Buy and read. Yes. So yes, that is all for the announcements that I have. Thank you so much for listening. As we close our event tonight, inshallah, may we request one of our speakers to recite a closing dua.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ila hadratin Nabi Mustafa Muhammadin sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa ikhwan wa zurriyati wa ahli baiti ajma'in. Shay'un lillahi lahumul Fatiha. A'udzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wal mursalin sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amin. Allahumma zidna 'ilman nafi'a wa amalan salihan wa qalban khashi'an wa rizqan halalan tayyiban bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. اللهم صل على صلاة تنجينا بها من جميع الأحوال والآفات وتغفر لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتطهرنا بها من جميع السيئات ترفعنا بها عندك أعلى الدرجات وتبلغنا بها أقصى الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الممات. اللهم يا قاضي الحاجات، اللهم يا كافي المهمات، اللهم يا دافع البليات، اللهم يا رافع الدرجات، اللهم يا شافي الأمراض، اللهم يا مجيب الدعوات، اللهم يا أرحم الراحمين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. صلى الله على خير خلق سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. والحمد لله رب العالمين. Just to inform you all, because you all are Dalailul Khairat, we have a daily Dalailul Khairat recitation. Around from 6 to 7 every Monday to Friday. At 6 o'clock, where we will start with 3 surah, Yasin, Waqi'ah, Muluk, followed by Dalailul Khairat. So if you are free, you can just join through Zoom. Right? You can just join.
Inshallah, shukran Ustaz for the invitation to the Dalailul Khairat recitation program that goes on daily. Inshallah, you can get more details following after this event. Our dearest seekers, brothers and sisters, that concludes our event for this evening. We thank you all for joining us and being part of this blessed gathering. May Allah continue to grant us many more opportunities of being in the presence of our teachers, the people who are close to Allah and His beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that we may always be reminded of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before we disperse, we'd like to apologize on behalf of the G2G committee for any shortcomings on our part throughout the evening. please feel free to share your feedback on the session through the link provided. I think there's a QR code. Okay, we will share in the event that you all don't get the link, we will share in the G2G channel, which becomes another reason for you to follow us on the channel, Telegram. Just search Guide to Goodness, Telegram, Instagram also have, YouTube channel also have, and promotion. Please feel free to share your feedback through this link, and we hope that it will help us serve all of you better, inshallah, in future events. And yep, do follow us on our Instagram, Telegram to get more updates, as mentioned earlier. And then let us now end with Tasbih Kafarah and Surah Al-Asr. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. الحمدلله رب العالمين. Thank you everyone. Good night and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.